I grabbed my water bottle as I began to slip into the sizable hole I had found under my metal bed in my prison cell. It was 1 a.m. I didn't know what this hole led to, but it was better than 10 years in county prison. I went into the hole and I fell onto the dirt. A transportation tunnel for the prison? I got to my feet and looked at my surroundings. It was a 7 feet or so tunnel, big enough to fit an average-sized human. I walked into the tunnel, losing track of direction. Out of nowhere, I hear the sound of breathing. I whip around. Nothing. I look forward. Nothing. I must be going insane, I thought. But it was no hallucination. I almost felt the breath of something, and it was a loud snoring sound. I continue walking until I see a rock and a pathway into a little cave-like room. I prepare to walk into the lit area until I hear breathing and go behind the rock. I watched in horror as I laid my eyes on humanoid bodies sleeping side by side. The creatures had faces that were covered in skin completely and lifeless gray bodies. I lay on my stomach where I can just see the room through a crevice. Then a man in prison clothes walked into the room and cursed in shock as he saw the horrifying creatures. One of the creatures scrambled to its clawed feet and lets out a roar as loud as anything I've ever heard. Then the lights go out. The breathing stops, and I notice red eyes gleaming through the dark. Then I hear running and the sound of death and terror. Then skin ripping and the sound of eating. I sit in horror, preparing for death. Then the lights cut on again. The humanoid creatures are back sleeping, and one more body is added to the group of sleeping creatures. I see the red-eyed creature sleeping again with its eyes turned dark red under its skin. I slowly walk back into the tunnel, and I burst into a run while I hear breathing. Then it stops as I cough, and I hear the sound of running behind me. I see the hole above me that I entered from. To my shock, a rope is thrown into the hole, and without question, I start climbing until I am helped into my cell by guards. They instantly throw a piece of steel over the hole covering it. I look up and see 4 guards and a man in a suit looking down at me. "What the hell was that?" I shrieked. The man in the suit shook his head and signaled me to follow him. I followed his orders, and he led me into a SUV at the exit of the prison. "Come in, friend," he said. I dragged my exhausted body into the SUV and sat in the passenger seat. "Call me John," he said. I turned my head and slightly nodded. "So, Martin, are you thirsty?" John said. I looked at him in confusion. "Is this a joke? What the hell was in those tunnels?" I said, slightly angry. John laughed. "Don't speak of that until we get to my place, okay?" John said in a firm tone. I shrugged, and John handed me a cold soda. The car begins to drive into a wealthy neighborhood and stops at a Victorian-style mansion. John pulled into the driveway and waved to go into the house with him. "Come and eat, then we'll talk about that little situation earlier," John said. I ate 2 whole steaks in one sitting and sat on his couch. John hands me a white shirt, a black hoodie, and some jeans. After I change, John waves me to sit on the recliner. "What was that earlier? Enough of this," I said. John just laughed and made sure all the curtains, doors, and windows were closed. He sits back down. "My name is John Wells, and I own the county prison," he said. "See what you saw in those tunnels was no illusion. It was very real," he continued. John had fear in his eyes. "That creature, the red-eyed creature's name is Voice. It was discovered around 50 years ago by my father, who owned the prison previously. We had to create a transportation tunnel under the prison for various reasons, and Voice was discovered halfway through the building process by a few workers. They died. It was not always like this. If only we would have paved some more roads." "Why?" he said in panic. Then he calmed down after some seconds. "I am almost 70 years old now, and Voice still haunts me. We barely escaped. It kept attacking us when we went underground. Voice used to hibernate underground and was basically dead until we found it by digging under a rock. Now it craves humans. So every 6 months, the staff orders all prisoners to work all day in the workyard, and they dig holes under prisoner beds to lead them to Voice, so it won't make efforts to get above ground at night. Oh, and wonder why it's called Voice. Because it can only see and hear organisms that are speaking or making some type of sound through the mouth. I don't know why. And when it hears a voice, all lights slowly shut off. The closer you are to the room, the faster the lights cut off. And if they cut off and you can't see, you're already dead, he said. I stared at him in shock that such a thing exists. Look, Martin, never speak of this to anyone except me, and you can be a free man, all your charges dropped. Just don't speak of this or try to stop our way of feeding voice. The world will be doomed if voice is found and discovered by the media and police. He finished. I sat thinking. So many questions, so much confusion. But I don't want to ever see that thing or hear its roar ever again, and definitely don't want the world to discover it. Deal, I said. John smiled. Speak of this to any police, news, or any living thing except me, and face the consequences. I nodded. Oh, and here is $1 million for your troubles, he said, handing me some cash and a check for $750K. You may leave now, and here's my number if you ever need anything, he said. I thanked him and walked out of the mansion where a new car was waiting for me. But I could still see Voice's eyes and hear its roar. I shivered. That was 2 years ago, and since then I've moved states and started a new life, and begun to live my best life with my fiancé away from robberies, pursuits, and Voice. Still to this day, I've never told anyone about Voice. I haven't talked to John since then. But some nights I still hear its distant roar echoing in the dark nights.